I'm going to give an overview of the Bhaktivedanta Institute. We began Prabhupada 51 years ago, thought of the idea of the BI, and he worked with the amazing, wonderful Dr. Swarup Damodar, PhD in chemistry, who's seen in this iconic picture. I'll explain that picture in a moment. And the idea was that we live in a world in which science is considered paramount. Science is the basis of how we think. Evolution is how we got here. And science can solve all of our problems. And Prabhupada actually gave a lot of credit to the scientists. He said they can be very proud, but they have something to be proud of. He wrote to us, so treat the scientists with respect. Yet there was something missing. And what was missing was consciousness, that life is different than matter. And so at the BI, we look at these issues. Is consciousness an emergent property of the brain? Even 10 years ago, that was the norm, though that's radically changing now. And we'll discuss that in a minute. Now to the iconic picture. In 1977, Prabhupada called for a conference in Vrindavan called Life Comes from Life. And his 5 scientists, that's all we had in the movement, are here. And on the left is Gyanadas, known as Nimi Swami, a wonderful sadhu. Then you have Swarup Damodar, who's passed on. In the middle, you have, believe it or not, me. Bodies do change. And on the right, you have Madhava, now Madhava Puri Swami, based in Princeton, and the late genius Sariputta Das. So we have our new headquarters, thanks to the donation from Haridayananda Maharaj's Family Trust. We have a major headquarters with a library and guest rooms. It's one of the most historic houses in all of Gainesville. Used to be home to the president of the University of Florida. And when he retired in the late 40s, he was personally recruited by Nehru to go to India and start IIT and other institutions, get the higher education working. Somehow Nehru didn't want to give that back to the British. So he invited an American to come. So this is the historical Tigard House, which is our headquarters. We have 5 subject groups we work on. Modern and Puranic cosmology, and we have a series of books that have been written by Sariputta, such as Vedic astronomy and mysteries of the sacred universe. Very important, probably one of our most important topics, is the history and philosophy of science. The BI is intended to be both a scientific and philosophical institute. When we talk about debating the issues of the day, be it evolution, the conscious as an derivative property or an immanent property for the brain, these issues, the answers require both physical and metaphysical answers. And so the philosophy of science is a critical aspect of what we do, and the history of science, so we can look at context. I'll give you an example. We recently published a book that discusses basically the flat Earth. By the way, spoiler, we're not going to fall off the end of the planet. There is a way to look at things flat in the Bhumandala sense. That's explained in great detail in this book and Mysteries of Sacred Universe. But the Earth is its globe. And when I went to elementary school, I was taught that Columbus was going to fall off the end of the Earth, except Columbus never thought that. So we try to look at things in both history and philosophy. The next area we study is mind, brain, consciousness studies. We have a division of the BI, the Institute for Mind, Intelligence, and Consciousness Studies, run by our dear Kunal. We're looking at biology and evolution and doing our first major workshop on that subject within the next year. And finally, we're the content developers for the Science Museum at the Temple of the Vedic Planetarium. We have many affiliations, and we boast a little about our achievements. We're affiliated with the International Consciousness Research Lab, formerly the PAIR project out of Princeton. I'm even on their board of directors. We have a group at Stanford University. We work very closely with the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia. Many of you have heard of the famous late Ian Stevenson, who did all the work on reincarnation, and we're continuing some of that work. And these are some of the other affiliations we have. We've done 14 publications. We have about 47 active associates working with us, so that number has grown since I made that slide. Attended 16 conferences in recent year. Like I said, affiliated with 7 different institutions. Recently, we had a meeting sponsored by the International Conscious Research Lab of trying to form a consortium of non-physicalists in the scientific world, and it went well. Our principal team that's working on the museum of the Vedic Planetarium to give an idea of what we're doing. Of course, me, I'm the director at Kandidi, who's written the amazing Atma Paradigm series, which you just Google Atma Paradigm and you'll be fascinated. It's a 30-part lecture series, but we've done a short version that's only 8 hours. It's rare that I can sit for 8 hours and not be bored, and I wasn't, not for a moment. Doug Watson, who heads up our cosmology group. We have Giridhari, who works very closely with Doug. These are, again, full-time. Kala Saru, Laura, Tamrapani, Murali Gopal, among others. We recently did a joint conference with IIT, Indian Institute of Technology, the newest campus up in the Himalayas in Monday. And we're looking at mind, brain, and consciousness. And as the title said, perspectives from the Indian knowledge system. Some world-famous speakers were there. With many of our members of our institute were speaking. It was a marvelous time, and we thank Leela Purushottama, Dr. Lakshmi Behera for arranging such. Also, at that conference, we announced that in 2027, we're going to do Life Comes from Life 50 years later. We're going to shortly announce a contest for papers, and we're looking for the best papers to present at the international conference 50 years later. We just recently attended the 30th Annual Science of Consciousness Conference. This is the largest conference in the world on consciousness. We had 5 speakers at this conference. There's a Kandidi speaking. And the question is top-down consciousness and real-world applications. So that was the name of our section that we ran. About 600-700 of some of the top people in the world are there. Names you probably heard of, such as Deepak Chopra. And what was surprising and something quite delighted, one of the keynote addresses was given by the very famous philosopher of New York University, David Chalmers. And Professor Chalmers, who've interacted quite a bit with our Institute members, good fellow, he coined the phrase, the hard problem of consciousness. That is the real philosophical issue the science and philosophy community has to face. And when he gave his keynote address, he noted, I'm speaking at the 30th Annual Science of Consciousness. But my journey began, he said, 34 years prior, when I spoke at the Bhaktivedanta Institute conference on consciousness in San Francisco in 1990. We were surprised and delighted by that call out. But we do have a history, and we've made many friends in the academic world, and that effort obviously continues. We've also done a lecture series with the Institute for Mind, Intelligent, and Conscious Studies, organized by our own Kunal, based out of, at that time, Caltech. And these are just some of the speakers we have. Those of you who are familiar with the subject matter will probably recognize names like Sean Carroll, Jim Tucker's a successor, Diane Stevenson for the reincarnation studies, Donald Hoffman, who's actually working with us now from the Allen Institute, you may recognize, but these are some of the top names in the field. The way our series works, the professor will give a 1-hour lecture, and the following week we do a 1-hour Q&A. All this, of course, has been done on Zoom. With sampling of our publications, based on the conference we did in 2021, organized by Cohen with the mind-brain interface. We have a wonderful monograph by Radhika Raman, Ravi Gupta, Does Sabda Make Prataksha Invalid? It's a question that often comes up. What do you do when your observation differs from what the Shastra, the scripture says? And Jiva Goswami has dealt extensively with that. The Vedic Cosmography in Modern Context, that's a book about the flat earth issue. A new book coming out any day now. The cover's just been finished by our own Murli Gopal, Mauricio Garrido. It's Krishna and the Quark. I'm not going to read the slide, but in this, we're trying to find some common ground between Vedic metaphysics and modern physics. And that book should be available this summer from the Northern European BBT. Please watch for it. It'll obviously be on Amazon and on our website. So I don't have a specific publication date, but just last week the cover was finalized. A vision for the future. We want to become a central resource for the anti-physicalists, a place where anti-physicalists can gather together, compare notes, discuss science and philosophy. And as I mentioned earlier, the anti-physicalists are no longer the outliers. Professor Hart of Notre Dame recently gave a talk, which I found quite fascinating. And he's an anti-physicalist, meaning that consciousness is not a derivative property from matter. It doesn't emanate from matter. And he said, I used to be such an outlier, and now I'm mainstream. What went wrong? Things are changing, and we want to become a central resource for this. And we want to create a repository of educational materials. And the work we're doing for the museum at the Temple of the Vedic Planetarium, the Science Museum at that, is giving us a huge repository of educational materials, which we're turning into YouTube videos, eventually literature, and of course, exhibits at the museum. So as Lord Chaitanya has mentioned, true elegance is stating the truth concisely. So I'm going to end my talk a little earlier than planned, and hopefully I'll be able to have a few minutes to answer any questions you have. One thing I want to make clear, my email is posted, as is our website. Please, if you want to get involved in the Bhaktivedanta Institute, there are many ways. So we need editors, proofreaders, scientists, authors, people who know how to write. Some people are really good at science, but just can't write. So we need writers. And obviously, like any project, we always appreciate and desperately need donors to help us. We are totally supported by grants and donations. And most of who work here are volunteers. Some that are working full-time will receive stipends so they can keep body and soul together. And if you want to work with the BI, please send me a note. I will refer you to the work group that's most appropriate for your interests. Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to have been part of the original Bhaktivedanta Institute back in the 70s, and in my final hurrah of this life to be able to come back and direct the BI. It's the biggest honor of my life. Thank you very much.